there's always room to create new rituals and new traditions.
What's up, all you beautiful co-creators out there? Hope everyone's hanging in there. I'm excited to launch this longer format series of collective reimagining, where we can have conversations about how today's situation could reshape our future. I recently had a nice long chat with a dear friend and experienced designer, Julie Comfort. We both attended California College of the Arts longer ago than I want to mention in this video, but there she studied glass, photography, and created immersive art installations, and all of that ignited her fascination with how emotions are depicted in art. This led to a successful 12-year career as a wedding photographer, where she combined her fascination of emotionally immersive experiences with her love of photography, bringing her and her little one all around the world. But as Julie's daughter approached the preteen years, Julie had a heightened awareness of the beauty-driven messages flooded towards young teen girls. Narratives reinforcing external validation flooded the market, and she wanted better for her daughter. Taking matters into her own hands, Julie became the founder and art director of Rabble magazine as an antidote to these messages. Based out of Berlin, Germany, Rabble celebrates an international audience of preteen girls. It's created a community united in a mission to elevate the voices of women and girls around the world through inspiring and uplifting content focused on creativity and global role models. I recommend heading over to rabble.com, not just to support the magazine and check it out, but because of their Get On Board series, where they offer a ton of free, outside-of-the-box at-home projects you can enjoy during this quarantine, including some free downloadable pages of coloring books from yours truly. But Julie states, I recognize the importance of engaging my young audience in experiences to build resilience and confidence rather than just reading about it. So Julie embarked on a new journey at an experience design program studying human-centered design and psychology, and thus launching her experience design company, Comfort Studio. Creating experiences from questions like, how can we make events more inclusive for introverts? How can we bridge the gap between mothers and daughters? How can we design a provocative dining experience around sensuality? And so much more. But sometimes it's the friendships behind these project ideas that tell an even bigger story. Over our 20-year friendship, we've collaborated in a number of ways, including our handmade glass jewelry company, Opal Black, and just creative projects to keep us accountable for staying in our creative flow. So Skyping in all the way from Berlin, Julie and I discuss raising a family during the quarantine, her perspective from Germany, and how our present situation could reshape our future. Please welcome experienced designer, Julie Comfort. Thank you so much for joining me and taking the time, carving out a little time to talk to me. I know you have a teenage daughter and a toddler, so it's not as much time as you're used to having, but you're a creative entrepreneur in so many ways, and we've always been life collaborators, so I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the thoughts you have, some of the ideas you have, and how you even are changing your own business models to sort of fulfill the needs. And part of this series is to really talk to people who are creative entrepreneurs and that have real world experience and follow through. And I know you've been doing a lot of research lately, and that's already changing some of the ways you're thinking about approaching business. And I think it's really a relevant conversation for some of what we're all experiencing today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas and some of your research, and so excited to have you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
So to kick it off, I wanted to reference this essay that I read last night and immediately sent to you called The Coronation by Charles Eisenstein. I will put that essay link below. I highly recommend everyone read it. Knowing that you were right in the middle of launching an experience design company and that you were really focused on how to create amazing shared experiences amongst humans right before the coronavirus hit, a lot of different parts of this essay jumped out at me, knowing that we were going to have this talk today. One being, and I'll read it right now, we can normalize heightened levels of separation and control, believe that they are necessary to keep us safe, and accept a world in which we are afraid to be near each other. Or we can take advantage of this pause, this break in normal, to turn onto a path of reunion, of holism, of the restoring of lost connection, of the repair of community, and the rejoining of the web of life. So as someone who is in the business of creating human experiences together, how has this new normal sort of shifted the trajectory for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really interesting article. particularly because it talked a lot about what is the cost of our freedom, basically. And for me, like someone who is, I have a very high tolerance for risk. And I think that this whole situation is really shedding light on kind of the different type of people that there are, people where safety is really the most important thing. And culturally, it seems like there's such an emphasis on safety right now above everything else. And at some point you have to ask yourself, like, if being safe is worth giving up our quality of life. And so for me, of course, I've spent like my entire adult life trying to figure out what I'm doing with my life and trying to kind of carve out a life that suits me and my skills, my desires, and it's been definitely a lifelong journey. This period for me hasn't necessarily changed my trajectory as much as it's like really focused it. I had already kind of made the shift from photography, which I did for about 15 years, into experience design. And when this first happened, I really just launched this new experience design website. And suddenly we weren't having experiences anymore. I was working on all of these projects with tech conferences and retreats. And then suddenly all of those things were canceled. And my initial thought was, oh, shit. I've suddenly become non-essential. You know, that became like this new terminology in my life was, God, is what I'm doing essential? And at first it seemed like, okay, it's not. I'm definitely have a non-essential business right now. I'm not providing food. I'm not providing materials. I'm not providing healthcare. Like, I'm totally non-essential. And that was a little mini existential crisis, I think, kind of having that realization of like, you know, my business is not important. But as the time has gone on, I think I realized actually how essential experiences are and how essential in-person, real life, getting together with people is essential to our lives. And even though right now in this moment, all events and things like retreats and weddings and conferences are all put on hold, it's definitely a moment to kind of incubate those ideas about what of those things are important. Why is it important and necessary to meet in person, and not just one person, but to gather a group of people together? What is it about the energy in a room full of people that is just so essential to our lives as humans? And I've just been thinking about that so much and have really kind of honed in, I think, on my path forward. I think my day-to-day routine hasn't changed that much. I mean, I don't go to the office anymore, but I've always been a bit of a homebody anyway, so that aspect of it hasn't changed too much. But really, the thing that I miss the most is just a sense of freedom over my own time and my own energy, and then really thinking about in the future, like when this is over, how am I going to restructure my life and my business and my career to focus in on what's important to me, which is freedom, personal freedom, and what's important to my work, which is gathering people in a really meaningful way. Yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome. Do you think, let me think of how I want to phrase this. Do you think our definition of gathering in a meaningful way will change?
Probably not. I mean, I don't think socially or culturally that gatherings will change that much, but I think people will take them for granted less. I think people will really, I think they'll just be more meaningful to people, and people will appreciate more what it means to get everyone you love into one room. You know, in a way, before I worked in the wedding industry for 12 years, and I went to a lot of weddings, and I think, you know, to some extent, weddings were just kind of a part of life. It was, you know, a ritual like marking a transition, but I think moving forward, weddings will be more meaningful to people. And I think that they should be more meaningful. I think they shouldn't be just like a kind of a cookie cutter, like, let's do this, this, and this, and now we're married. I think it will mean more to people to have everyone in one room together after this. I think people will appreciate it more. And I hope that people will put more attention into kind of shaping these gatherings around the meaning rather than just kind of the spectacle. I think weddings can veer toward just being like, let me show off my good taste versus let me create an experience for everyone that, really bonds us together and really marks this transition in a really significant, emotional, and meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think weddings are actually a great metaphor to kind of even talk about a lot of the cultural shifts, because weddings definitely are very important and meaningful milestones in our lives. But we do have almost on autopilot sort of a structure that was sort of handed to us. And it's repeated over and over and over. And we often don't even really know where those traditions and where even just that flow of events that do seem to be repeated over and over, where those even come from, and are they meaningful to us?
Yeah.
This does seem like an awesome opportunity to kind of examine those areas where it's like, you know what, we just sort of do that on autopilot, but we never really investigate whether that makes sense for us anymore. And I know you do a lot of research on this. And what would investigating that kind of look like to you? And what are some opportunities to sort of switch our perception of what those events could mean in our lives?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said earlier, I think instead of this kind of pause, this rehab changing my trajectory, it's really focused it. And I think before I was thinking about experiences in a really broad sense, and I was thinking about, I was working on a project for conferences, for like professional networking events, and I was also working on more kind of intimate retreats. And this experience has really made me think about gatherings in a more significant way, that I think it is pointing me in the direction of working solely in weddings. And that seems kind of a natural path for me because I worked in the wedding industry for so long and I've been to over 200 weddings. So just from a personal perspective, I've had a lot of research into modern weddings just by being a part of that process for 12 years. And then, of course, I read a ton about it, and I've been reading this great book called The Art of Gathering. And it doesn't get so much into the origins of rituals, but it talks more about kind of the meaning of rituals and how we kind of just pick and choose rituals based on the fact that we've been exposed to them, rather than, really interrogating if they mean anything to us. And I think there's also a huge possibility to create our own rituals or new rituals. I mean, one thing that I thought might be kind of interesting is I've heard a lot of people say that after this, people won't hug strangers anymore, and they might not shake hands. And I thought about how in other cultures people bow to each other. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting at this moment if we kind of create a whole new way of greeting people and acknowledging people when we meet them that totally changes our culture. We have a culture of shaking hands when you meet someone in a professional context, but what might evolve out of this where maybe we don't have physical contact anymore, but a whole new way of acknowledging each other kind of comes out of this space that's new and different and becomes a part of our culture. I mean, in the same way that shaking hands was. I just think that sometimes we get it in our minds that rituals are sort of set and traditions are sort of set, but there's always room to create new rituals and new traditions. And I hope that coming out of this, people will be thinking about those kind of things, and that we'll see an evolution of ritual and tradition and ceremony and those kind of things that fit the new selves that emerge from this time and the culture change and all of those things.
you've inspired me over the years is watching you evolve as a creative person and just a human being and an entrepreneur. One thing you've always been able to do is really question your own belief system and take inventory of your belief system and find the limiting beliefs and getting them out of the way. And that's been a really inspiring thing to see and has helped me do the same, especially to see the results of what happens when you get a limiting belief out of the way. And I think kind of what's being unearthed is a lot of like culturally held limiting beliefs. And
Absolutely.
there are some that are obvious, but then there are some underneath that aren't as obvious. And I love even
Mhm.
just thinking, you saying, it does feel sad to think of a world where we don't shake hands or hug anymore. Um, but there's an opportunity there. Living in Southeast Asia for like a half a year, I actually loved the bow. I found it to be
Yeah.
so comforting, so welcoming, so inviting, and it started to become really natural for me as a way to acknowledge somebody. And I think
Yeah.
we don't even think that we could build that in here. It's like we don't do that here, they do that there, but
Yeah.
says who? Why? Um, what are some of those culturally held limiting beliefs? Our beliefs are shared narratives that we,
Yeah.
perpetuate by continuing to tell those stories. And what are maybe some culturally held limiting beliefs that might be worth looking at?
Well, the biggest one, I think, is the belief that we can't change, that people can't change their behavior, and that things just kind of are the way that they are. But I mean, this experience has shown we are absolutely capable of changing our behavior. I mean, this has managed to change the behavior of people all over the world, all at once. And it took, yeah, a pretty significant and unfortunate catalyst to kind of prove that point. But I think before this happened, I also would have believed that people, as a collective, society is not capable of making a big shift like this. I was really cynical about things like climate change and things like that because I just thought, yeah, I mean, really to make any kind of significant impact, you need to get most people on board with making different choices and behaving differently, traveling less, making different purchases. It seemed absolutely impossible. But yeah, this definitely has proven that it is possible. It definitely sheds a light on, well, what is a catalyst that can make people change? And, of course, this goes without saying whether or not it's a positive change. I don't want to get into that, but it just does prove that people are capable of changing their behavior
Absolutely.
if they have a compelling reason to do so.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't even know if we've focused on that so much of taking a moment to pause and say, how amazing is it that we just experienced the entire world kind of collectively agreeing to shift something
Mhm.
major together?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a dark side to that, which really shows kind of how malleable people are and how willing most people are to kind of go along with something. I mean, you definitely have the outliers who are resisting this, but for the most part, I think people really can see the benefit, not for them, just for themselves, but for the world. And I think that's also what's interesting about this is that for most of us um, the staying inside and social distancing isn't really for our own benefit. It's for the benefit of other people. I'm most of us who are young and healthy, we're not really worried about getting the disease as much as we're worried about it killing someone else. And that's really interesting to me that people are willing to make this huge shift for the benefit of other people and not just for themselves. And by contrast, the people who seem to be really fighting against this, the people who are protesting in the States and stuff like that, they seem to be more selfishly focused on their personal liberties being threatened. And I get that. I mean, I don't like it. I don't like the idea that, I'm not as free as I was a few weeks ago. But Yeah, but I think it's just really interesting to see that people can be motivated by the greater good, I guess, rather than just their own personal interests.
I think like in our models of thinking about a better world, a lot of times it is helpful to have sort of that enemy or that bad thing that we want to collectively get rid of. But in the
Hmm.
real world, there really is no perfect utopian society where all things negative are eradicated. Um, I just don't, I think negative emotion and tough experiences are all a part of the human experience. Um,
Definitely.
yeah.
I think actually, like, I think going back to the whole belief system thing, I think one of the beliefs, the limiting beliefs that I had in my life that I really had to unlearn in adulthood was the belief that you were working toward some kind of destination of happiness, that if you went to the, I mean, I think it goes as far back as maybe middle school, high school, where you're working towards getting into a good college, and then from there you're working towards getting a good career, and there's always this kind of looming, like, finding the perfect partner. And for me, someone who moved around a lot, it was always finding the perfect place to live. And I think for a very long time, I don't think I unlearned this until probably my mid 30s, that there was this destination of happiness. And if you kind of got all of the pieces right, that you could kind of put them into place, and, voila, you would be happy for the rest of your life. And it's particularly damaging, I think, in our ideas about relationships, that if we just find the right partner, that we'll just be happy for the rest of our lives. And that was a very, limiting belief for me that I had to overcome, because the reality of life is that it's ups and downs forever. Like, there's going to be high points, there's going to be low points, and it's just up and down forever. I think that that's just life for everyone. And if you're lucky, it's more highs than lows, and your lows won't be as low. But I've really kind of made peace with that, because really, the cliche of the deeper the valley, the higher the mountain. And that's really true. And I think anybody who's lost a really close loved one will tell you that it's, of course, one of the most painful things that you can experience, but it does make the highs of life higher, because you have experienced this kind of pit of grief. It kind of, when you go back up, it increases the distance, I think, between grief and happiness, and it does make the highs higher. The joyful moments are happier, and it does give you a new appreciation of kind of the smaller joys in life. And I think this is a weird thing to say, but I almost feel sorry for people who've had lives that are too easy, because I don't think that they truly appreciate those kind of everyday joys in the same way that people who have had really difficult experiences can. Um, Maybe that's presumptuous of me, but that's kind of how it seems to me. And I think this experience will definitely make it so that people will appreciate kind of those everyday joys more. Like, I know one thing I really miss is, like, the weather is gorgeous in Berlin right now, and Germany is known for its beer gardens, and I want nothing more than to sit outside at a picnic table with a bunch of strangers having a beer in the middle of the day. And I think this whole summer is going to go by without ever getting to have that experience, and that sucks. That's a bummer. Um, but I think when we can experience those things again, it will be even more delicious and even more pleasurable. And one thing, when it comes to experience design, and to tie this even back to weddings, is I think when people are designing an experience, designing well, let's just say planning their wedding, they want it to be this really upbeat, like, experience from beginning to end. And I've heard people say they're afraid to acknowledge maybe a dead relative, or in the toast or in the ceremony or something, because they don't want to be a downer. But actually, I think it's really important to create those kind of down moments, because then they kind of spring you back up into joy and happiness and appreciation, and really kind of savoring the good moments. So I don't know, I think it's important to kind of embrace the downs as well. And this is, of course, a big down for a lot of people in life. And I mean, it's hard to kind of see your way out of it when you're in it. But I think in the grand scheme of things, this will have a positive effect on people's life outlook when we come out of it.
Absolutely. It's super interesting thinking about how we do try and design experiences where we want to eliminate all chances to feel negative feelings and only create situations where we're feeling positive feelings. And that's interwoven into so many parts of our culture we probably don't realize how set up we are to minimize negative emotions in our lives.
Yeah.
And there's a real detriment to that. And I think one of the nice things about slowing down is having a chance to kind of feel those things and having a little more room to let ourselves kind of feel some of those things that are hiding in little nooks and crannies that we aren't acknowledging, because they don't leave our bodies or leave the overall experience of being a human, but it's almost like they're the germ and we're trying to sanitize everything, and I would love to hear kind of like, as an experienced designer, what does kind of embracing negative emotions as part of life's experience maybe look like?
I mean, I think you hit on it when you said acknowledging them. I mean, I think that everyone has low points in their lives and in their day. And I think what's really interesting about Americans is we really don't acknowledge kind of the negative parts of life in the same way that other cultures do. And of course, I really only realized this when I moved away from American culture. But, when you ask somebody how they are, like the go-to answer is fine. It's not a question that really acknowledges people's real state of mind, and
yeah, you're not supposed to answer that honestly. You're supposed to say good.
It's just a greeting, really. It's just like, hey, and I realized that when I moved to Germany, because here, if you ask somebody how they are, they might say to you, oh, I'm really depressed today. And in the beginning, it caught me a little off guard. I was like, okay, I don't really know you. It seems a little personal to share that. But they were like, well, you asked. And I think it's impossible right now to not acknowledge that we're all kind of struggling a little bit. And I don't know if this will necessarily shift anything in that regard, but I think that we do need to acknowledge, the downs as much as the ups. And I read something once that was really interesting and about friendship. And basically what it said is, to be a good friend, you should open up to your friends about the negative moments in your life, because it makes them feel less alone about their own hardships. And that we tend to do this thing with our, maybe not with our closest friends, but with like maybe our more casual friends, where we want to have this image of everything's amazing, everything's great. You only want to tell them about the good things. You don't want to be a downer. You don't want to bring them down by telling them something bad that happened. And actually, people don't really want to hear that everything's great in each other's lives, because then that puts the impetus on them to also have to kind of keep up appearances, and might make them feel bad, like, oh God, I'm having a really hard time at work or in my relationship or whatever, and not then have the freedom to also share that. So actually what we're looking for from our friends is to really acknowledge, the shitty parts of life. And there are a lot of them. And I don't think that takes away from the good parts. I don't think it serves us to only focus on the positive, because I think really it connects us to all be able to acknowledge, like, and I think that's one of the powerful things about this experience is, like, we're all in this together, everyone in the world, we're all struggling through this together. And I think that's really interesting that we, in a way it kind of connects us, and that's a positive thing, even though it's coming from a negative place.
And that's fascinating to me that the question is interpreted differently in Germany. I'd love to hear overall. You're experiencing this in Berlin, in Germany. Is there anything you're noticing that seems different to the reaction in Germany than to the United States?
Definitely. I mean, I think culturally, because Germans are really well taken care of by the government, they really trust the government. And I think because it's a social democracy and we do have things like universal health care and that kind of thing, that it's baked into the culture that people care about the whole over themselves, kind of. It's just a different kind of cultural mindset here that people are really willing to do what it takes to help others. I mean, I say that, and of course there are definitely people out and about. Like, I don't know that everyone is really following the order, very strictly. I think especially since World War II, Germans are a little bit hesitant to kind of blindly follow orders, which fair. Um, but we also, whatever they're doing here is clearly working. I mean, I think we have a high incident rate, but we have like one of the lowest death rates in the world. And I just think that, I don't know, people here don't seem to be grumbling about it in the same way. It's kind of like, you got to do what you got to do for the greater good. I think people really do, like, part of having kind of universal health care here is the people who make more money know that they're paying for people who have less money to have health insurance, but they are happy to do that. It's like part of the culture that, like, it benefits everyone when everyone is taken care of. They can kind of see how their own actions can benefit society as a whole. And to me, that seems like something that, America really struggles with. But, otherwise, I think it's pretty much the same here. We're all kind of going through the same thing in lockdown. But yeah, we also financially are definitely better taken care of here. And so I do feel very privileged to be here right now because I am not working right now and I am home taking care of my kids. But I don't have to worry about my lost income. So that's huge.
That's
really
huge. Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't take it for granted. I feel really, really lucky to be here.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about sort of, two dominant cultural narratives, which, have existed for a very long time in many different ways. They're certainly coming to a head and kind of very heightened right now of sort of the more, what does freedom mean to you, individual liberties, being able to operate from, what you want to do versus more of a collective thinking, structuring our systems in a more collective way, thinking more in terms of how your behavior affects others. And a lot of times when we talk about these things, we talk about them as if they're in conflict with each other or it's one or the other. And so I'm interested in kind of poking around with narratives that maybe reframe this so we don't think of them as separate from each other or in conflict with each other. And maybe there's a way where both are honored.
I mean, I think every culture, every person, every society kind of falls somewhere on a spectrum between freedom and security. And, every kind of place and individual, society has to find where they're comfortable living on that spectrum. I mean, I lived for a while in Costa Rica, and I mean, there was very little law enforcement there, at least where we lived. I think there was one cop in this town, and if something happened, you didn't count on the police. It was kind of like the Wild West in a way, where you sort of felt like you had enormous freedom. You could really get away with anything. It was kind of this lawlessness that felt very free, but you also had to sacrifice certain protection in that scenario where, if you got robbed or something, you were pretty much on your own. And that was kind of one model of where kind of a culture can lie on this kind of freedom to security spectrum. And I think right now we're looking at the situation, we're willing to sacrifice our freedom for the security of not losing, huge part of our population or not ourselves becoming sick. But we feel this sense of, it's temporary and we're going to get our freedom back. But it does, pose the question of, well, how much are we willing to put up with? How long can we tolerate this? And you can see different cultures are handling it in a different way. I mean, Sweden was basically like, we're not going to do this to our citizens. They're going to lose their minds if we try to lock them all down now, and it's going to take 18 months. They're going to revolt. So they didn't really implement a lockdown at all. They kind of had very loose social distancing guidelines. And it was really an experiment with, people's health, whether or not it would work out. I think the last I heard it was okay. It was going okay. It seems like their numbers are kind of in line with other countries that did do lockdowns. But yeah, I think I've thought about this a lot on a personal level too, because I'm definitely someone on the freedom to security spectrum that, I really want much more freedom, and I'm willing to give up security for it. I mean, in my life, I haven't had, a quote unquote real job in, 20 years with a boss and a paycheck. And I know a lot of people would find that kind of intolerable. It's definitely had a lot of highs and lows. There's definitely a lot of insecurity, especially financially, living that way. And I know a lot of people in my life, just they wouldn't be able to tolerate that level of insecurity. They want, to know. But then a situation like this happens, and the people who had jobs and steady paychecks really are no more secure than the people who didn't. So it's, to me, I guess security is a little bit of an illusion anyway, because yeah, sure, you can create laws that keep you safe from certain threats. You can do things to lower the risk, but you can't eliminate it altogether. I think something like a virus really highlights that you can't eliminate risk in life. But it's easy for me to say I'm someone who definitely has a much higher tolerance for risk than a lot of people, and a lower tolerance for things like stability and consistency and boredom. But yeah, I think it's different for everyone.
Awesome. That was an awesome answer, actually. I like thinking about it in terms of the freedom to security scale.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I spent a lot of my adult life like trying to figure myself out in that regard, because I've always wanted a lot of freedom, but it also creates a lot of anxiety. And I've had to find my own kind of point of how much anxiety can I live with. And I have definitely had moments in my life where I'm like, oh, this is too much. Like, I just want a job and a mortgage and, just to be in one place for the rest of my life. And I always kind of push myself in that direction a little bit. And then, I feel, oppressed and trapped and have to break out of this life that I've created for myself and move to another continent and, go right back to where I was before. And so it's been a lot of trial and error for me to figure out my own point on that spectrum. And I think I'll probably be fine-tuning that for a while longer. But that's, it's fine. I know of myself that I definitely kind of veer more toward freedom than security, that's for sure.
I did have a life of 8 years managing an art supply store, and that was a very consistent routine. I had a staff that I was responsible for, a consistent paycheck, and that I did find deep comfort in that security. I genuinely did, and gathering the courage to leave that sense of security and walk into the unknown was incredibly difficult. And I think if I didn't have sort of that voice of, an older, mentor saying, like, psst, this isn't actually real security, it's just built into your mind. It might have taken me even longer to take that plunge. So I think you really are hitting on something, and I think this worldwide virus is showing us exactly that. All of those things that made us feel secure are gone.
Absolutely. And I think it also highlights some, government problems and political problems as well, because, in the US, if your health insurance is tied to your job and you lose your job, I mean, it seems to me that people in the US are the least secure in a way of kind of developed countries, and that's really scary. But it'll be interesting to see if this shifts people's mindset on an individual level, for themselves. Like, okay, is this going to be a catalyst to trying something new that maybe they always wanted to do and they were afraid because they needed this sense of security, which they don't have anymore? Maybe now this will be a moment to explore something completely different.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's sort of, I know for me, I often act when I'm in a situation where I feel like, you know what, I have nothing left to lose. Like, I'm not risking anything. And I think a lot of us are sort of finding ourselves there. It's like, we don't know how long we'll be in this situation. My gut feeling is that it will be a little bit longer than we even think, and that it will be a very slow, kind of a slow rollout back to a, quote unquote normal way, and it will happen in stages, and it will take a long time. So there are so many moments along that stage to kind of reevaluate what are we doing, and do we want to just build in the old models, or do we want to say...
Yeah, but it could push people in either direction, and that's what's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because I think if you were someone who was risk averse before and then lost that sense of security, it could make you either be even more risk averse in the future and seek out security even more, or it could go the opposite way and be like, well, I have nothing left to lose now. Now is a chance where I can take this risk that I've always wanted to take, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I mean, just as a humanity experiment, I'm just so fascinated by what this is going to do to the world, like culturally, on a human level, psychologically. It'll just be, I mean, I was telling my daughter the other day, like, this is pretty much the most profound thing I've ever experienced that will have the most reverberating effects for our lives, for sure.
As a mom who has, you have a teenager and a toddler, so two very different age groups. How have you handled talking to your kids in a way that doesn't make them feel scared, but also is not shying away from the reality of our situation?
Yeah, I mean, my younger daughter, she's definitely too young to understand anything of what's happening. I feel really bad for her that she's separated from her friends right now. I mean, I think at this age, this kind of formative age, kids learn so much from each other that it's really sad that she has to miss out on months of that kind of interaction. And with my older daughter, I mean, she's 13. She's really bright. She's reading information on the internet. She's definitely educating herself. It's been a huge shift for her trying to keep up with schoolwork online and everything. And my attitude this whole time has been like, it's a crazy situation that we're in. Like, we can kind of look at it as it's just kind of wild, and we're just along for the ride, and we don't have anything to be personally fearful about. And I told her that in the beginning. She said to me, should I be scared? And I said, not for us. The reason that we're social distancing is really because we want to protect the more vulnerable people in our society. And she really gets that. But the one thing that I've really kind of tried to hammer into her is that her and our mental health, it comes first. To me, that's the biggest priority right now. I think it's really hard for her. She's a very social person, to be away from her friends. And I think it's also really stressful to try to kind of keep up with maintaining your own education and be responsible for your own education from home. And I've just told her repeatedly, like, do as much as you feel comfortable with and just forget the rest. It's fine. I really feel like her mental health is more important, and just kind of taking care of herself. She's taken on some new hobbies. She's redecorating her room. And I think all of those things are really critical right now in, like maintaining, your mental health. I just think for me and my life and my experience, I think I've never regretted prioritizing my mental health over everything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's just really the most critical thing at this point.
That's great advice. Super interesting. I never thought about that until just now, that today's youth will always have this part of their youth where the whole world paused for the collective good, and they're hearing a lot of stories of like, we may be safe, but this is the right action for vulnerable people. What that might do to an entire generation to experience that together when they become the leaders. They have a totally different perspective. That's fascinating. I didn't even think about that.
Like, I think that empathy is kind of emerging as the most important thing out of this in terms of leadership, and just in general, like empathy has really proven its importance to humanity. And I think that's really interesting, because for me, empathy has always been the biggest driving force in my work, and like everything I've done, photography and now experience design, I feel like it's really driven by empathy. And so this whole experience has been really validating for me and the work that I do, because I think that what's happening in the world, when you see the successes of leadership are definitely a result of very empathetic leadership. Like, some of the leaders that are emerging out of this as models, like, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for example, she's a very empathetic leader, and the Prime Minister of Norway, and talking directly to the kids there. And I just think we're seeing empathy as pretty much the most characteristic in getting us through this. I mean, the entire idea behind social lockdown, social distancing, is that we are driven by an empathy for other people, that we're willing to kind of sacrifice some of our freedom and liberties for other people, so that they don't die, so they don't get sick, and, so that people we know, their loved ones, don't get sick. And that really comes from a place of empathy. And I just think that empathy has really emerged from this as the most important thing. I've just found that so validating, because for me, that's always been like the biggest driver behind my work. And as a photographer, I always try to have empathy for my subjects and how awkward it can be in front of the camera. And I was always really willing to make myself awkward behind the camera to make them more comfortable in front of it. And now, as an experienced designer, I think I'm using empathy to imagine what I would want to get out of a particular experience or a particular moment in an experience. And I think empathy is probably the most important characteristic to have as an experienced designer, because you really are imagining how you want to make someone feel, basically, and then creating a way to trigger that feeling. So that's been an interesting part of this experience, is seeing empathy emerge as such a critical element of humanity, because I think it's been lacking in a lot of political leadership and a lot of social aspects of our culture. And so that's been really meaningful.
I do hope that this expands our ability to think in empathetic ways and see kind of the broader picture of perspectives. Well, I super appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know you have a lot on your plate with two kids, and you're accommodating the time zone all the way from Germany, so I really appreciate it. But I really did want to hear your thoughts on and your experience during this time. I always love to hear how you're thinking about things. It gives me great insight. But I'd love to hear what's one book that provided a life-changing experience or life-changing perspective for you. It doesn't have to be the only book that's done it. It doesn't have to be your favorite book by any means, but just any book that had some sort of life-changing impact on you.
Yeah, I mean, God, there have been a lot, but I think I would say the most recent one is this book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, because it really validated all of these things that I was already thinking about, but it felt like everything that I felt like was important right now, I felt very seen by this book also saying how important these things are. But it really gets into yeah, why we gather, why it's important, why, how to make gatherings more meaningful. And it's the kind of book that I think anyone could benefit from. I mean, it's from hosting a dinner party to, planning bigger gatherings. It just is so full of really great ideas. And it definitely helped propel me on this trajectory that I'm on right now. And maybe not a profoundly life-changing way, but definitely had an impact.
Absolutely. Awesome. I will link it in the show notes for everybody. And then I just want to ask everybody this because I think it's really interesting and fun. I'd love to hear one thing that you miss the most that maybe you didn't expect to miss, and one thing that you don't miss at all that maybe you expected to miss.
I think the thing I miss the most, and it probably just because it's seasonal right now, is going out to eat, and specifically sitting outside and being in the nice weather and with good friends and just kind of having a long, relaxing meal outdoors. That would be really nice. I really miss that. And then the thing I miss the least, it took me a little while to get into the rhythm of really enjoying being home with my kids. At first I really resisted it. I did not want to be a stay-at-home mom. Again, I really, really did not want to be at home all day with a 2-year-old. But actually, now that we've done it for a few weeks, I actually really enjoy the moments that we get to share. And I know that I'll look back on this time as having been really special because we get so much time together. There's so many moments I would have missed out on otherwise, and that's really special. But that said, I can't wait for daycare to reopen. I really do miss my free time and I think the biggest loss of this time for me has been that, so much of my work is really creative, and as a creative person as well, when you get into that creative flow where you hit on something and you get into that headspace where time just flies by. And that's what it's like for me a lot of the work day. I get into that creative flow, and then the next thing I know, it's time to pick my daughter up from daycare. I'm like, oh, where did the day go? I could work for another couple hours. And time went by much faster before. And now it feels like time is very, very slow. It doesn't have a structure. My days don't have a structure in the same way. And I just it's just really slow. It's been weeks now since I've been able to get into that kind of creative flow where the hours just fly by. And that's something that I deeply, deeply miss and look forward to having again. But the unexpected benefit is, I've developed a really special, I think, bond with my daughter that we're together all the time now. And and she just adores me, and it just feels wonderful to be so adored and, have to drink fake coffee all day, but it's sweet.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for carving time out from your cute little one and your awesome teenager. And
my pleasure. Thank you for asking me to do this. It definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone a little bit to be talking on video, but it's
fantastic.
You, and we talk all the time, so it feels natural.
And that's a lot of what I'm doing this for, is to push myself out of my own comfort zone. It's really it's difficult to put yourself out there, and but I do see, there's a pro and con to everything that exists, and we've seen sort of the downside of technology and how that can make us feel more separated and more isolated, but there's also a beautiful side of technology, and I think we're all experiencing that right now, is that it's really the one way we are able to stay together and be together. And so
I think one of the unexpected benefits of this time too is kind of this maybe overriding attitude of fuck it, if not now, when, all of the things that maybe people talked themselves out of doing, maybe with you and videos, I think you've talked yourself out of it for a while, and then you get into this place where it's fuck it. Why the fuck not? part of my language. But you know what I mean? I just think that there's not really another way to articulate that. I think it's just this attitude of fuck it, why not, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. In all the voices of worrying about how you're going to be perceived and everything, it's sort of like,
Yeah.
who cares? I can't
Yeah,
control that
exactly.
anyway. And I know that I can't control that anyway. So I might as well start stepping more into my power and feeling like it's okay to take up a little space and have a voice and go for it.
Yeah, totally. I think my biggest fear about really anything that I do, my kind of little voice of doubt is always, you know, does this matter? Is it important? Is it necessary? And I think, yeah, I've just come to a point of, I mean, is anything, is it, you know, and then, yeah, like, fuck it. Why not? Let's just do it.
Let's do it. I'm all for it. I have to just get over my own fears and step into that arena and, like you said, say, screw it. I mean, it's here we are. So what do we want it to be? And part of how we figure that out is through talking to each other, having conversations, sharing our stories. I really believe that for collectively sharing our stories, like, we can become an unstoppable force. So thank you so much for sharing a little part of your story with us and bringing some perspective from a different part of the world and just getting a chance to talk to you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Please subscribe if you want to hear more conversations and perspectives from today's creative thinkers as we collectively reimagine how our current situation can reshape our future.